Bonjour à tous. Est-ce que vous... Ah oui, vous nous entendez bien. Bonjour à tous. Merci d'être revenus nombreux dans cet amphi pour cette table ronde que j'ai la chance d'animer, de modérer, sur Ukraine, Moyen-Orient, Afrique et sur comment la désinformation façonne les conflits modernes. C'est un sujet qui est extrêmement vaste, vous l'avez entendu. Il a été évoqué de manière parfois perlée, de manière parfois extrêmement directe. C'est devenu un sujet réellement incontournable. Et pour l'évoquer aujourd'hui, eh bien, on a un panel que je qualifierais d'exception. Modestement, on ne sourit pas vraiment. Nous avons avec nous Marie-Doha Besancenot, qui a été secrétaire général adjoint à la diplomatie publique de l'OTAN et qui a rejoint depuis mars 2025 le ministère des Affaires étrangères où elle conseille le ministre sur la communication stratégique. Merci d'être avec nous sur un agenda qu'on imagine plus que chargé. Nous avons aussi, Ladies First, Célia Lebur, qui a été correspondante de l'AFP pendant près de 10 ans sur le continent africain, Afrique centrale, Afrique de l'Ouest, avant de rejoindre le siège et de devenir chef de la cellule investigation numérique et fact-checking pour l'AFP, pour l'Afrique francophone, là encore, un théâtre extrêmement fertile. Et puis, je continue, Alessandro Accorsi, qui est journaliste, qui est expert en communication spécialisée, qui a la particularité de s'être spécialisé dans l'influence des technologies dans les guerres, les conflictualités, les disputes, et qui a travaillé notamment pour l'International Crisis Group et qui a été aussi dans l'équipe qui dirigeait les efforts de communication stratégique pour la région MENA, Moyen-Orient et Afrique du Nord, pour l'Union européenne, correspondant régulier sur la zone du Moyen-Orient. Et enfin, last but not least, Shayan Sardarizadeh. Excusez-moi, je suis plus habituée par mes tropismes aux noms, aux consonances russophones et ukrainophones, qui est senior journaliste à BBC Verify, qui couvre les conflits mondiaux et notamment toute la question technologique de l'IA, de la désinformation et de l'extrémisme. On lui doit plusieurs reportages sur différents conflits, l'Ukraine, Gaza et préalablement sur le Covid. Donc je vous l'avais dit, un panel d'exception. Peut-être quelques mots. 2014, on a le début du conflit en Ukraine, du Donbass. C'est un terrain qui est utilisé comme étant un laboratoire à ciel ouvert d'opérations informationnelles de tout genre. Et puis arrive 2022, l'invasion massive, les opérations informationnelles se déploient de manière massive, avec quelque part un acteur particulièrement agressif, particulièrement désinhibé, la Russie, qui est directement impliquée sur le territoire. Mais ce n'est pas le seul, peut-être un premier de cordée, peut-être un premier de classe, mais pas le seul. Et on voit que ces impacts-là ont un changement, ont un impact extrêmement fort sur les approches géopolitiques, géoéconomiques, et évidemment sur les approches diplomatiques. Donc, si vous me permettez, Marie-Doha, je voudrais commencer un petit peu avec vous pour que vous nous apportiez un petit peu la lecture que vous avez eue de ces changements d'un point de vue diplomatique, de ces acteurs et comment vous le transcrivez.
Merci beaucoup. Vous l'avez un peu décrit, en effet, 2014, je pense que c'est bien de se projeter 10 ans en arrière parce qu'il y a eu une évolution assez évidente qui est, au-delà des manipulations de l'information ou des opérations dans le champ informationnel au service des conflits, une grande évolution qui est le ciblage des populations civiles en parallèle de ce qui se passe sur les terrains militaires et qui change fondamentalement la donne et qui en font un champ de bataille à part entière. Donc bien sûr que ça impacte la diplomatie. Peut-être si on balaye un peu rapidement les différents tournants qui ont vraiment eu lieu depuis 2014. Donc vous avez cité la Crimée évidemment avec les petits hommes en vert. On sait que ce genre de tactique ça a perduré avec en 2022 lors de l'invasion de l'Ukraine des opérations dans le champ informationnel en Ukraine menées par les Russes dans chaque village qui devait être entre guillemets libérés, accompagnés par la création de faux comptes ukrainiens massivement qui permettent de retracer le trajet prévu de la conquête territoriale. Donc tout ça, ça demeure. Ensuite, il y a eu quand même un vrai tournant avec 2016, et on en parlera certainement, mais les élections américaines et l'usage de techniques de ciblage publicitaire dans ce champ, et la réalisation que, en effet, ces outils peuvent avoir un impact géopolitique très fort. 2017, grosse année de lancement de la propagande russe avec lancement de Sputnik, de Russia Today, etc. Donc une montée en gamme de la propagande très désinhibée. Gros tournant Covid, où crise de santé se double d'une crise de l'information dont on ne s'est jamais complètement remis. Et puis évidemment 2022, avec pour la première fois un conflit où vraiment l'opinion internationale est un champ de bataille complètement central, dans un conflit qu'on peut suivre à la minute près, de vidéo en vidéo, avec des analystes installés dans le monde entier. Et enfin, 2023, le 7 octobre, avec, là sur un autre terrain, une diffusion vraiment massive d'informations sur ce conflit, qui pourtant n'est plus couvert sur le terrain par des journalistes, mais qui est massivement l'objet de récits, d'images projetées à l'international. Au milieu de tout ça, il y a évidemment les enjeux technologiques, avec le rachat de grosses plateformes par Elon Musk, etc.
So all of this is, in fact, the population, the civil population, and the opinion of the public is obviously also very important. We saw last month in Poland, for example, there were military events, you might say. There were drones that flew over Poland, were accompanied by a massive wave of different accounts that we saw in Poland. It was accompanied by the massive data that was made available. All different accounts were available. And most of these accounts said that attributed all of this chaos to Ukraine. So we can see that there's been a major investment in the informational areas, and also very specific targeting in the language of the local populations, and very localized. So it's really very fine-tuned targeting of local populations. And it's very difficult to counteract these at the national level. So this is a tactical unit. It's definitely a tactical tool, disinformation, that's been used now around the world. So what can we do when we're a diplomat? I think the first thing that we do is to try to understand the different playbooks of the main adversaries. And these playbooks are quite transparent. They don't hide them. You can see them. But there are historic techniques that have been used, whether we talk about Russia or China, or even different close partners, some of our closer partners, and that's another major topic that has changed just in the last couple of years, is that we have major partners such as the United States or Israel who are massively invested in information tools and are having an impact on us with some stories that they're putting out that are against us in Europe. So we have to kind of reinvent our, what we might call public diplomacy. That's not what we call it in France, but that's a term we see in other countries, which is a response to the logic of diplomacy, which we have to tell stories. We have to explain. We have to provide further explanations in addition to the regular diplomatic channels we use, which are, of course, just as complex as they've ever been, and even more complex than they used to be. So at the same time, all this is going on in parallel, and we have to counteract how things are, stories that are told, and how they are distorted, which is not very easy to do for diplomats because we're not used to doing that. So we have to find a balance between how we can explain the different tactics that are being used, and at the same time have to follow what's actually happening and see the results of all these actions. And the second element is, of course, we can't do it on our own. And what's essential, these essential maneuvering that's been using affect many different countries. Even if they are adapted, of course, to each country, as I said. So international coordination is important, not just to characterize what is happening to us, but also, if possible, in order to denounce together at the international level what's happening. We've made a lot of progress since the end of 2018. At the G7, we now have a rapid response mechanism that we've been using, which has also been duplicated in the European Union. We have an alert mechanism that we can use to quickly sound the alarm so that the countries in the European Union can alert each other when they see something happen in their own country. And normally between neighbors, we do observe what's going on in, we observe similar phenomena in each country. And the goal is, in the end, to be able to denounce what's happening or have a common model we can use to denounce aggression in this area. Also, NATO as well. We shouldn't talk about NATO. We also had NATO, which also has its own mechanism as well. The goal is also to have a coordinated response, and that's very difficult for us to do. It supposes for the allies that they have to reveal our own vulnerabilities to their own partners, their own allies, which is not necessarily something very natural for us to do. So we tend to share the things which we're very sure of what we've seen, but what we have difficulties doing is to sharing things under an embargo, you might say, to implement a common response over several months, things that we can do for cybersecurity, but not necessarily on the informational level. Thank you. I'd also like to take advantage of say that I'm sure you probably have a lot of questions. You can use the Slido application to ask questions with the QR code. You can scan that if you'd like to ask questions or try to answer the questions. You talked about the globalization of the conflict, of the dispersion as well. The Admiral talked about it earlier. He says, when I get an order, I know how to follow it. Let's get down to work. Let's get out in the field and get to work. Now, when we talk about disinformation and misinformation, we're going to talk about real specific cases in the field. We've talked about Russia, of course, who has been a real disturbance, really been disturbing the worldwide strategic setup. And we're also going to be talking about Africa as well. Celia, could you talk to us a little bit about Africa, maybe, and share your experience about the activities that, what's going on in Africa and maybe the disparity you see in Africa? It's not just one single area, it's a whole continent. There's a lot of specific features, obviously. Could you share that with us, please? Yes, in Africa, we talk about a continent that is confronted by increasing conflict, which takes many different aspects, as is around the world. It could be in the Sahel. It could be the jihadists in the Sahel. It could be the Great Lake conflicts, the Sudan as well, where there's a lot of conflicts. There's many different types of conflicts in Africa, but what's important, maybe what we should talk about first is talk about the specific issues in Africa. We're still in the prisons of, there's a lot of people who can't read in the continent. And we also have a rate of penetration of telephones and internet, which has increased, which has skyrocketed. It used to be only like 1% or 2% just 20 years ago. And now it's been 50 to 80%. That has changed everything in Africa, in the approach that we have in Africa to information and to culture in general. So there's a multitude of different actors who are involved, of course. Russia, of course. We have to talk about Russia, of course, which in particular, since 2022, they have taken a larger place on the international scene, trying to create new alliances, and have really pivoted towards Africa in a very impressive manner. And they also have many different types of resources and decentralized resources that they can use. This has been talked about a lot, and they have Sputnik, for example, Russia Today, which are state-sponsored media. They also have research organizations, surveillance agencies to influence elections, and also they have even larger scale projects such as LACTAC, which is a project that was created by Prigozhin, the president of Wagner Group in 2013. And today you can see there's actually new initiatives today, like the Africa Initiative, which is a press agency, a Russian press agency, which has a very big footprint in the on the African continent. They organize a lot of events, including cultural events. And of course, with the local media, they work together with the local media. In fact, Russia, I talked again to the Sahel, of course, because they've really found privileged allies in the Sahel. because there are military authorities who are in power. We've seen the increase in power of the jihadist groups who are trying to convince us that they're legitimate, and they're trying to change the balance of power in their favor, even if that's not actually really the case. And they're using France as a recurring target to explain all the failures of the France in the region. So there's really been a close relationship between these different actors. And that's something I'd really like to insist on, is we should not overlook all these different initiatives that are taking place on the continent itself. Because a lot of Western observers draw attention to the fact that it's Russia who's pulling all the strings, who's the bad guy. But there's also there's a lot of an extremely fertile ground to work with. Historically in Africa, people are reivindicating, especially young people in Africa, who are really rising up against the former colonial powers, such as France. They're frustrated by different failures, like the Barkhane operation in Mali and in the Sahel. And also the perception is that people are not judged on the same levels. That's not fair. We say that some countries are safe to go to, others are not. And some countries can be dealt with while others are left off to the side. Also, there's countries where there was democratic elections, and since they've been independent, but even though they're democratic, they still have not met the desires or the hopes of their people, or even the basic access to basic services is also lacking in certain countries. And we've seen that from the Z generation movement in Madagascar and Morocco. They really are revolting right now against their own governments. So they want their own history, their own cultures, to people to recognize the value of their inherent value of these own cultures. And this has historic aspects. And this is one of the reasons that there are new partnerships with countries like Russia. So these local actors who really have their own agendas, you might say, I could give you one example, which has a lot to teach us, such as in Burkina Faso, where we've seen that disinformation between the Russian actors and the local actors. For example, starting in 2022, there emerged in Burkina Faso a lot of fake pages, fake accounts on Facebook, for example. Which is part of a group called the Pan-African Group for Commerce and for Business and Investment, which was in fact financed by Lobby Invest, which was a mining company linked to the Wagner Group in Central Africa, and who worked a lot on trying to create a whole story about how bad the terrible influence France had on Africa. And they talk about Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, who now compares himself, who gives a testimony and is considered to be a post-independent hero in Burkina Faso. So they're really building on this story, this fake story that they're building in Burkina Faso. Facebook had to delete 100 of accounts, but in fact, it's really a story that we can't eradicate, because they keep popping up again over and over in the same way. For example, the LACTA project is not die. Even though Frigozine died, the LACTA project continues. And we saw recently a campaign in 2024 and 2025, which was very interesting, which was targeting the African diaspora in France. And the idea was to accuse the French government that they were going to send agents into Ukraine from Africa, recruited from Africa. So this was fake news, it was actually quite ingenious what they did, because these were fake advertising. And actually they created fake recruitment advertising from France, the French work agency on internet, which was fake. They also massively distributed a video of a citizen from Cameroon who talked about how he had been recruited by France to fight in Ukraine. And also, it's not just on the digital level as well that works. They also had fake meetings in Paris, and that actually happened. There were fake protesters who have signs who say no, no to France. So there's a lot of different aspects you can see that are involved in this. So this is the kind of the interventionist aspects from Russia, but also we shouldn't forget there are other external actors as well. There are other major countries, major places such as China, for example, who have a footprint in Africa as well. China, on the other hand, it's a little bit different the way they intervened. It's lots less aggressive, a lot less hostile in terms of the fake story they want to set up in Africa. But at the same time, they will have this pro-BRICS story that they will set in place, the same as Russia, with the idea being to discredit what the liberal democracies in the West are capable of providing. But they're also going to highlight their economic successes, all the investments they've made, the economic model of China, of the ruling party in China, and also in terms of soft power. What they do is we also see a lot of agreements which have been reached in order to freely share content with the African media. So content produced by China in China is interpreted and translated, and then it's been copy and pasted massively in the African media without taking into account the fact that this was produced by China. Thank you. So you were talking about China. You said there's kind of a positive story, a narrative that they're setting up, which is kind of proposing a different option. Are there other actors, which may be less expected ones, who might be seen as more positive, at least positive in terms of seen from the Western countries, and that are, have other objectives? Yes, another thing I should say is France was also accused, not directly the French institutions, but in 2020, Facebook deleted accounts that were associated with individuals who did have links, for example, with the French army, even if they never openly attributed these actions to the French armed forces. So they said they were using propaganda on the networks when they were talking about Mali and Central Africa to try to promote a very positive narrative of France's operations on the continent. Some might say all's fair in love and war. But when you talk about actors, which maybe you wouldn't expect to find there, one phenomenon which maybe a lot of people didn't notice, but which was actually very interesting, was, for example, is that certain non-government organizations who have a narrative that is irreproachable when they talk about climate change, protecting the environment, for example, and they come in and do conservation efforts in Africa, in agreements with African governments. I can think of one, for example, the African Parks, because it was founded by a Dutch billionaire. And there have been a lot of journalists have done investigations who have been very critical of this program, even if they have defended themselves. So these contracts were made with governments, which kind of fill a void that was left by the local powers, often on the borders, where there are different armed groups are in conflict. So there's a lot of confusion there. So it's hard to find create any framework there. So what they're trying to do is work in these areas to avoid smuggling, to avoid illegal deforestation, and a lot of we have these eco rangers there who are armed as well. But we've seen some testimonials there where we see that some of these guards are also not just doing covering ecological things, but they're also protecting the borders and also maybe working with some of the anti-jihadist armed forces there. So that leads us to ask a lot of questions. What exactly is the mandate of these people who are working in these kind of gray areas, which are there, who are supposed to be protecting the environment, but in fact they're also being accused of green neocolonialism? Obviously, there's a lot of things we could talk about. We could spend all day talking about each of these subjects. I would like to pass the microphone over to Alessandro. Maybe you could give us some more information about your area of expertise, which is the way in which information is used in open conflicts. And in particular, how it has been used, the media aspects of it, and how it has been used. First, thank you for your invitation. I'm going to talk in English, though, because I'm going to talk about of Gaza, and it's kind of a difficult subject for my French. So I'm going to switch to English.
Conflicts and disinformation and influence operations, we often think of Ukraine, of Gaza, obviously, of Sudan in a different way. But I think that Gaza, and I've really focused a lot of my research on that, I think it's a blueprint for future conflicts. And I will come back to why. But in brief, what we saw, what you all saw, yesterday the chiefs of staff talked of the moustiques that come towards our windshield. You know? What we saw is this bombardment of information, some real, some not, and it doesn't matter. Because the aim is actually to destabilize us, to make us weary in emotions, to make us rage or make us happy or whatever, and fostering doubts, creating alternative realities to the point that facts don't matter anymore. And when facts don't matter anymore, we can imagine anything, and we can imagine even the worst. And that's actually what Israel implemented as a strategy, and it's a long-term strategy that's been documented and that started at least since the war in Lebanon in 2006, when Israel realized that it was losing the information war, and from 2014, so a lot of investments. I'm focusing on Israel for three main reasons. I can talk about Hamas and other actors if you want in the questions, but for three main reasons. The first one is that this is an asymmetric conflict. It's an asymmetric conflict on the ground, it's clear, but it's also even more of an asymmetric conflict on the digital space. We have on one side one actor, one state actor that can coordinate the action of several other organizations that are swirling around in a larger network. And on the other side, a very heterogeneous coalition of actors ranging from Hamas to normal citizens, like some of you might post something to say Free Gaza on your social media. And there's no coordination there. There's one actor, Israel, that has enormous resources and has the political, legal, economic leverage and pressure to actually bend some of the rules or use them to suppress some of the narratives and amplify others. And ultimately, there's only one actor that is capable of formulating and executing a coherent strategy. The second reason is the impact. I don't think that when we talk about Gaza, we should talk about influence operations. If we're looking at it from an influence operations point of view, if we're thinking that influence operations ultimately try to affect perception or behavior in some cases of actors, well, we can debate and we can say that Israel's operations were largely unsuccessful. Today, Israel is probably more isolated than ever, is maybe less safe in the long term than ever. There's a global protest movement every day. There are calls for persecution. If we look at it from an information warfare point of view, if we look at did Israel achieve its objectives on the ground thanks to influence operations, if we look at it as a continuation, not only continuation of war by other means, but integral part of war, it was an extreme success. 2 years and 3 days ago, we could have never imagined that in 2025, we would witness a conflict in which the distribution of aid would be privatized, in which humanitarian NGOs would be completely delegitimized, in which more than 200 journalists and media workers were killed. In 2023, the number was 82 in 1 year. And then we had, in one conflict, over 200 journalists killed. We could never imagine that in 2025, with the terabytes of data and videos that we produce every day, we still have entire areas of Gaza, a very, very small enclave, a very small strip of land, where we didn't know what was going on because there was no documentation, because there were blackouts, because there's no internet communication system, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also a blueprint for future conflicts because we know that actors learn from each other. Russia learned a lot from the Gulf actors after the Arab Spring, and the Gulf actors learned a lot from Russia. Israel learned a lot from Russia and from Ukraine. The Ukrainians learn from others, and we know that there is this cross-fertilization, and they learn from each other and innovate. And in this war, we've seen a surge in innovation. We've seen the use of the lead that Israel has on tech, for example, and artificial intelligence, to push further certain things. But also the fact that Israel was allowed to bend the rules in certain cases in ways that we would have never allowed Russia to do. Israel was allowed to publish advertisement videos on YouTube or gaming apps like Angry Birds. We would have never imagined allowing Russia to publish those ads to call Ukraine a Nazi state or something like that. And so that's why it's a blueprint for future conflicts, because we have weaker rules today that we can enforce. We have a lot of double standards, and we live in a different world. In previous wars in Gaza, and I'm going to conclude with that, the strategy was clear. Israel didn't change actually much of what they were doing compared to previous wars. In 2014, in 2018, 2021, Israel was trying to flood the field with narratives and try to amplify certain narratives and selectively suppress others, but it didn't work. Why? Because on the other side, we had facts. On the other side, we had documentation of violence in Gaza that actually countered those influence operations. But today, we live in a world that has changed, in which social media companies and social media platforms do not hold their responsibilities anymore, do not keep their responsibilities, in which we have changed. Because being exposed to disinformation and to the concept of disinformation for 10 years make us not believe anymore. It makes us believe that everything is disinformation. And when everything is disinformation and we are bombarded with information and we don't know what to believe, we go back to our own confirmation biases and what we selectively want to believe in. And that creates further polarization that can be exploited to make facts irrelevant. And when facts don't exist anymore, you can imagine anything.
Vous avez le droit.
You have the right to believe so. It will be your alibi to be a little bit late on the roundtable. You mentioned you understand French very well, so I'm going to do this in French. You used you mentioned to what we call gamification, the use of games. Do you have any other examples? Because what is really interesting is that the conflict contracts time and contracts boundaries and targets everyone at the same time. It's me, it's you, it's civilians. And on games, we broaden even the spectrum on this gamification approach. Do you have any other elements on that? And please feel free to take the floor.
I think that there is also there's one element that plays into the gamification, and it's the fact that we increasingly experience news and what's happening in the world in an asynchronous way. We get it on our phones while we're scrolling through videos of shoes and football reels, and then we get a video from a conflict. And it's a video that might have happened 5 days ago, might have happened 30 minutes ago. We don't know. It's asynchronous. It's not presented to us. We don't have the context. And that helps actually to introduce the gamification element in a way. Because there is a lot, for example, of memification. There's a lot of using viral challenges and using dance memes and not only the aesthetics from video games, but really like from viral things that we experience every day to foster engagement, to engage with that content, to reshare it, and to reinforce this asynchronization of content so that we are bombarded with this information that we can't make sense of, and at the same time to participate in. And one of the biggest examples, actually, that has not been discussed a lot and was part of my research, is the fact that soldiers in every war document their acts of violence, and usually they share them, and usually they share them with each other, because they're ashamed of doing that. In this war, we've seen soldiers posting videos of what they were doing in Gaza on TikTok, on Instagram, as part of viral challenges in which they were inviting others to loot Palestinian properties or to do other things. We've seen them post to dating apps as a way to be sexy and get laid. and to invite others into supporting this and playing into this. And somehow at one point there was an element where it became a game also for the soldiers themselves, who collects the most. And this mobilizes audiences outside, and it has a double effect. On one side, it mobilizes your supporters into supporting you actively as if we are at a football match and not in a conflict. And on the other side, enraging your opponents and pushing them to take further, more extreme actions actually against you to express their rage. And this only for fools like the polarization and the instability that we live in.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Shayan, I'm going to now move to you. We talked about Ukraine since 2014 as an open sky lab. Where are we at today with this war theater? What are we looking at in terms of attacks and response? We talked about gamification. We talked about using social media. We talked about using the real world and to do a cross between the real world and this capitalization. Talking about digital, among all the new technologies and AI, how is it going to be mobilized? Can you tell us your expertise on that?
First of all, apologies to everybody for speaking English. I come across as the archetypal person from the UK who can't speak other European languages. I promise you we learn French at school. It's just I was never the bright kid at school, and also haven't been the bright kid at work. So apologies, everybody. I think we all need to understand now, first of all, we are living in unprecedented times in terms of, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen several major conflicts, one after another, in ways that we were not used to. Ukraine, obviously Gaza, India and Pakistan, Israel and Iran. Like, these are major geopolitical conflicts with wide-ranging influences across the world that have happened one after another. And I think in a way, all of us are kind of a bit shocked to see all of it. But at the same time, we have to realize that conflicts in the 21st century are no longer just fought on the battlefield. It's not just tanks and artillery and fighter jets on the battlefield that are part of the conflict. Half of it is also the information war, which is fought specifically on the internet and on social media, which is where most of us now get our news. And we saw that with the conflict in Ukraine, actually not just in 2022 when the invasion started, but going all the way back to 2014, when there was the invasion to the east of Ukraine after the Euromaidan protests. We saw it in Syria during the Syrian war. But then in the last few years, now that social media is overwhelmingly used across the world by a lot of people to access news, we are seeing that as soon as a conflict starts, we see a wave of mis and disinformation on social media. Plenty of it, I would say the majority of it, goes completely unchallenged. And it completely shapes narratives and views of people. Some of it is by people who are opportunistic. I call it usually engagement farming. And that's completely incentivized by social media companies. You just, when a war starts and a lot of people around the world are paying attention and are concerned, you use that to post all sorts of content, videos, posts that are kind of interesting, but at the same time have no basis in truth. But you get a lot of engagement and you actually can earn money. There are a lot of people around the world who actually have operations specifically aimed at making money when something like this happens. COVID was another example, a major global story. But some of it is part of the information war, and half of it is people on either side of that conflict who either feel strongly about it and want to protect their side or support their side. Part of it is the authorities that are fighting those conflicts, and they want to influence views and minds around the world about their role and their winning and their sort of their right to fight this battle. In Ukraine in particular, I think it is so obvious that Russia is so invested in the information war, and they've spent so much time and effort in the last few years, actually even going back to 2014, but particularly since 2022. I would say most of us don't even recognize some of the stuff that we see on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram that is actually funded or in some cases completely done from Russia, but we have no idea that that is the case. We get lucky in some cases where researchers, journalists actually find some of these operations on social media that are sort of designed to influence the way we think about the conflict. I'll give you a couple of examples. A couple of years ago, me and a couple of my colleagues were sort of searching on Instagram, as we normally do, to see sort of what was going viral about the conflict, what people were saying about the conflict. And we came across these videos that were sort of very professionally produced. They were mostly sort of 1 minute long, and they were posted by accounts that had just one video. Like, these were accounts that sort of pretended to be somebody in France, somebody in Germany, somebody in Poland, somebody in Italy, somebody in the UK. And they had just these one videos on their accounts. We found like 1,000 of these accounts, each of them with one video, 1,000 videos. And all of these videos, which were 1 minute long, they all basically were designed to tell you that the money that Western governments were sending to Ukraine was being used by the Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian politicians to enrich themselves. So you would say, for instance, in French, you would see this video posted by this account that looked like a normal French woman, for instance. And it said that President Zelensky and his wife had bought a villa in Cannes for 20 million euros with the money that the French government had given them, or the American government had given them, or the British government had given them. Or you would see another video in German saying the Ukrainian defense minister or the chief of staff of the Ukrainian armed forces had bought a mansion in Berlin or a mansion in Barcelona. And these videos were all sort of, as I say, 1 minute long, and the audio was AI generated. So the audio was, you could very clearly tell that it was like an AI voice that was sort of narrating the script, but the script was very professionally created. And the video itself showed like mansions, luxury cars. So we started looking into these accounts and these videos, and we found out that so many of these mansions or luxury cars that were appearing in these videos, we actually traced them and we found the owners. And in many cases, people would say, well, actually, you know, the owner of this villa is this guy, he's a French person, or the owner of this luxury car is a German guy or an American guy that they bought it. Or in many cases, there were like mansions or villas that were on sale. So you would contact the real estate companies in different European countries, and they would say, well, no, it's not owned by President Zelensky or this Ukrainian politician or that Ukrainian general. These are on sale, or in some cases, they actually have owners that are not Ukrainian at all and are linked to the Ukrainian government. And then we started messaging these accounts to ask them, like, who are you? Like, where did you get this information from? Did you make this video? Are you aware that this video that you've posted is actually very similar to all of these other videos in different languages? And we wouldn't get a response. So we went to TikTok and we said, we gave them a list of these accounts. And we said, look, there are these, like, we found these 1,000 accounts in multiple languages that are posting specifically about Ukraine and corruption in Ukraine. But we've done some investigations and we've found out that actually the narratives in these videos are all completely made up. They're completely fake. But interestingly, the reason we were very interested in is that these videos are very viral. So in one case, one video had like 1 million views, another one had 4 million views, 5 million views. In total, I think these 1,000 videos, when we added up all the views together, it exceeded about 100 million views across the 1,000 videos. And you would see like actual French users responding to these videos and go, really? I didn't know that the money that it's all taxpayer money, right? That we're sending to Ukraine is being used by Ukrainian politicians to buy a mansion in Cannes. That's terrible. Why are we sending them that money? Or somebody in Germany or somebody in the UK. Like, naturally, people would be outraged about it. So we went to TikTok and we said, could you please investigate this and tell us whether these accounts, A, are real, and B, if they're not real, can you tell us whether they're actually people in France or Germany or Poland who are sort of come from a different viewpoint, are opposed to sending money to Ukraine, which is a legitimate point of view. We live in democratic, free countries. If people are opposed to it, they're opposed to it. That's their right. But if they're not actually people from Poland or France or Germany, then that's interesting for us. So TikTok said, OK, give us some time. And about a month later, they came back to us and said, well, actually, you gave us 1,000 accounts. We've found 12,000 accounts, all of which are part of a coordinated operation that we believe is originating from Russia. And they're pretending to be people in France or Germany or Poland and are trying to convince people that the money that their governments are sending to Ukraine is being used by corrupt authorities in Ukraine to enrich themselves. And they told us at the time, this is late 2023, early 2024, they told us that was the largest influence operation that they'd ever seen on their platform. And they took them down, and we noticed when they took those 12,000 accounts down, very quickly, a couple of months later, they started reappearing, new accounts started reappearing. And they would take them down, and then new accounts would start reappearing. And each time they posted these videos, they would still go viral, despite the fact that we sort of publicized it, TikTok publicized it. But that's the way social media works these days. Or very quickly, to give you another one, last year, when President Zelensky and his wife were in Paris for D-Day ceremonies, we saw this story appear on social media, particularly on X, on TikTok, on Instagram, about President Zelensky's wife, Olena Zelenska, buying a sort of luxury Bugatti car for 4.5 million euros during D-Day celebrations in Paris. And we sort of traced it to a French website that was very obscure. We'd never heard of it. It was called Vérité Cachée. And we have the BBC has a bureau in Paris, and we contacted our colleagues and we said, are you familiar with this website? Have you heard of it? And they said, no. So we then looked at this receipt that was produced, supposedly showing that Olena Zelenska had bought a Bugatti in Paris for 4.5 million euros at the time where D-Day commemorations were going on in Paris. So we went to Bugatti and we said, is this a genuine receipt? They said, no. We asked them, have you actually sold a Bugatti to Olena Zelenska for 4.5 million euros? They said, no, this receipt is completely fake. There's been no such transaction at all. So then we went and looked at this French website, and we tried to trace the owner, and we found out that the website had actually been set up 5 days prior to that story going viral. And the story, and the website actually looked like a normal news website. It had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories, particularly about Ukraine and Russia, and also a lot of sort of stories about France, sort of normal stories about France. It looked like a local French news website. So we started sort of checking these stories about France, and we realized a lot of them were actually genuine stories published by French news outlets. They'd just rewritten them in a kind of a slightly different language, so it wouldn't pop up as completely copied and pasted from, say, Le Monde or Libération. But they were basically the same stories, just rewritten slightly, some paragraphs going up and down. And we found out that the owner of the website was a gentleman by the name Jean-Marc Dugan, who, if you're not familiar with, is an American guy who was a cop in Florida, who got involved in a range of controversies, and in 2016 fled Florida because he was being chased by the authorities, by the FBI, for corruption and a range of other violations, and went to Moscow. And he's now a Russian citizen. So from there, we tried to contact Dugan, and then we found out there were hundreds and hundreds of these types of websites that were sort of pretending to be local news websites in France, in Germany, in America. We found so many in America as well, in the UK, and they were basically copying and pasting stories from genuine outlets in those countries to appear like genuine news websites. But then each of them had this sort of bombshell stories about some Ukrainian politicians, Zelensky, cabinet ministers, mayors of major cities in Ukraine, sort of being involved in corruption cases, all of them completely made up, and many of them were backed up by AI in the sense that you would have like a video of a whistleblower who was a journalist in that country presenting this story and saying, I've investigated it. And when we looked at those videos and we found out those individuals, that supposed journalists, actually didn't exist. It was an AI-generated video. Many of the stories had like bylines on them. One of them, for like one of the major stories that was published on a website that was supposed to be an American news website based in Chicago, was written by a woman called Jessica Devlin. We looked into it. We looked at the picture of this Jessica Devlin, who was supposedly a major journalist in America. We never heard of Jessica Devlin. And we found out the picture was actually an American author called Judy Battalion that stolen her picture, and Jessica Devlin didn't exist, wasn't a real person. But even more interestingly, we found out that a lot of these stories were actually generated with AI because they were so lazy, they were running so many websites that in some cases, like one of the French websites was sort of producing a story about how Russia had shot down Ukrainian drones. And like halfway in the story, that left the prompt, like it looked like a genuine story, but halfway in when you read the story, it said like, please bear in mind that everything about President Macron is bad, and Russia is the good side in this conflict. It was right there in the story. They'd forgotten to take it down.
Perfect.
Yeah, they'd forgotten to take it down. It was like, as I say, they were running hundreds and hundreds of these websites. So in some cases, they had sort of those types of errors.
Thank you.
And we're now kind of pretty certain that that operation was run from Russia.
Thanks a lot. That's definitely fascinating.
So we saw that there was many actors, some pushed by some states, some that work in an autonomous way. It's a very competitive market with sometimes they try to achieve economic goals as well. I would like to quote your book on organized crime in Africa and the African mafia, because there's also a use of organized crime to disinform and to influence. We don't want to go there because it's going to take a lot of time, but keep it in mind. Shayan, you brought up some videos that are generated by AI, some theft, identity theft. We remember the operation of Banger, who checked the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France, and who denied it, that he was accused. So we can see that AI is used more and more. We have sites that are generated, entirely generated by AI, that are going to feed other AI, like LLM, the chats that you all use, that we'll use more or less. And before I ask you a last question, maybe you could give me a very quick answer on a complex topic. A lot of people are going to use those LLMs to do some fact checking. How do you perceive that? And how is it going to impact your way of working? Because this is easy to do, quick to do. I just want to have one answer on that, and whether it's the Mistral chat or any other tool, how do you measure it, and what is your input on that? I'm not a technician, but AI helps us identify AI. So I'm good about it as well on those tools, who are more and more easy to use for non-experts, and they allow us to go beyond the classical scenario and to visualize in real time what a campaign looks like. In the awareness process for the institutions, it's very important to see that a campaign looks like a constellation of actions at the same time, an operation with some targets, investments, because it's not free, of course, so we can trace that. And then that allows us to zoom on the actors, on the anomalies, and to treat them through a channel that is a legal and technical channel, and European mostly today. So on the LLMs, we see that one of the major evolutions, which is what we call poisoning the realm, is the idea when you go to ChatGPT, you ask ChatGPT a question, the references are not classified depending on their reliability. And we can have some Sputnik sites that classify the answers at the same level. So for now, we don't have an answer on that, but clearly we see more and more that it's part of the strategy to make the capacity of these tools evolve and fool us or twist our answer. Alessandra? It depends on the places.
To what you just said, I personally really dislike Grok. I think Grok is one of the evils of this word, not only when it posts Nazi messages, but in general. There's one thing we should remember about language models, and like ChatGPT and Grok, for example, or others. They're usually trained to please us. So if you ask the same question twice, and you can see that under tweets, for example, when people ask things to Grok, is this real? Based on your previous inputs, based on how you formulate that prompt, and et cetera, you get different answers. And trusting these answers is actually pretty bad. At the same time, the use of AI for fact-checking, it can be revolutionary in a way, but we're still not there, and Shayan can say more about it. I think the main impact of AI actually is not so much the deep fakes, like how much we're tricked by it, but that it really plays into this idea that everything is fake and everything could possibly be fake. And we fail to understand that actually sometimes the fake is right in front of us, but we want to believe that it's real, and so it doesn't matter anymore.
Merci beaucoup. Et j'ai une dernière question.
Thank you very much. I have a last question I'm going to ask you all before I let you scan the QR code so people in the room can ask their questions. We know that our environment is getting more and more aggressive, inhibited, aggressive, and aggressive. Many actors that are going to regroup depending on the context without being coordinated by a doctrine, and versus some states are very clear on what they're doing. We could see some regular attacks in the digital world and the physical world, one feeding the other, the cross-fertilization that we mentioned early on. The civilian population are going to be targeted depending on which social group they belong to. The electoral process that are going to be major stakes. The major events like the Olympics in Paris, that there was a lot of disinformation campaigns on those. So we're really living a world where there are a lot of attacks of various forms. We talked about that about the information on those by the chiefs of staff. And this morning, the Admiral Vendier said maybe we should turn the tables now. So of course we defend ourselves, but at some point, would it be a good idea to be offensive on our turn? And how do we go about it? And I'm turning to you naturally. Of course, I invite you all to answer the question, but particularly to you, Marie-Doha, because this is not necessarily the initial role or the initial image that we have of diplomats. However, with this changing world, how do you harness this debate, this topic? Thank you for asking the question. It would be quite a personal testimony that I will give you on this question. After 2 years in NATO, with a defensive goal, where we wondered ourselves that very often, can we be offensive in the field of information? And we came across the idea of doctrine, of disengagement, that are linked to the ones that we have at OTAN, NATO, which is peace, crisis, and war. And in France, on the diplomacy side, we don't even ask ourselves the question, and we've adopted a triptych that works very well, which is not peace, crisis, and war. That was not inoperative, but this idea of continuous competition, and that was taken very seriously by the armies for a while. with tools to understand it, technical tools to understand it, and the understanding of the information world as a part of the conflict. On the diplomatic side, I can tell you that we're very lucky that we have a very strong mandate, which is not to overlook some very aggressive statements, and to be ready to develop new weapons, which is not a natural or intuitive for diplomats. So in a few words, what does it mean to be offensive? For managers, it means to be able to respond, because that is what shows. And what is difficult is that we have to be constantly reacting, and to be good in the reaction is not natural for diplomats. We talked about the gamification and all that. Our tools to analyze situation allow us today to understand well these different attacks that were submitted to and to qualify them as attacks. And I want to give a very positive message on France. Since the Paris attacks, we're quite ahead of our European leaders, peers, because of what happens to us. And it's not just a communication gimmick. So, but we fully understand that. So we've invested in tools, we've invested in analysis and new skills that we didn't have at the time at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we can make this change from an institutional communication towards a communication that is more committed to fight for the perception, the narrative. We can talk about the influences and all that. We have a very clear mandate from the president and the minister that the role of diplomacy today is to contribute to re-establish the truth of perceptions, and we can be very happy what we're doing, our investments and all that, but we should not stay in the phase where we're just, shocked, or we make all these efforts and it doesn't show in the terms of communication, but take it as a data, basis data to find out how we're going to work on the information and to show all our diplomatic efforts. So we have thought about that. In terms of response, last year we created a new account, French Response in English, to address the change of information that we have embarked on. Because since the Paris attacks and with the creation of different tools to protect the French territory, we have acquired new tools to protect the operating systems and channels, to identify the actors, to know exactly who is responsible for what action, and to know what it means politically. So it's not just enough today to follow major troll farms, because with the MAGA sphere and with other uninhibited partners, Israel as well, that works through very strong networks and NGOs who have real people who have really 30 million followers, who invest, who take over the information field and panel. So we have a big one with the recognition of Palestine, when we saw the number of attacks that came from everywhere after that statement was made. So we have a very clear conscience, and we understand now we don't have just to be technical in characterizing the approach and the attack, but we need to have an approach as well on the narrative and prepare what we call weapons, which are arguments to defend our action, and things that we are ready to use. Alessandro talked about gamification. It's not intuitive for us either, but of course we think about in terms of jokes and memes to win this fight of narratives in real time.
Can I say very quickly on AI? Very quick. I think we all need to recognize that this is a technology. Like until a couple of years ago, I was the guy who would appear in these conferences and say, we need to calm down a little bit. There's a lot of hype around AI. That ship has sailed. That time has now passed. We all need to recognize that the technology is advancing at a pace that is mind-blowing. Like month on month, we are now seeing things that looked completely unbelievable. The pace at which the technology is producing content to a high value is genuinely surprising, but also at the same time scary. So we all need to get up to speed with AI now, right now, like tomorrow is late. It's going to change our lives beyond recognition. But at the same time, we need to understand that it comes with risks. The conflict between Iran and Israel, in my view, is the first time that we saw AI being the primary tool for misinformation used by both countries. We've seen some of it in Ukraine, we've seen some of it in Gaza, but Iran and Israel. And before that, India and Pakistan as well, where AI was basically being used directly to influence the conflict in terms of videos created of damage in Tel Aviv, or videos of missile sites in Iran that were completely fake, made with AI, but they looked so good and so realistic. In one case, we had the Israeli foreign minister on the this is late June, where Israel conducted a couple of strikes on a major prison in Tehran. We had the Israeli foreign minister posting a video of that strike, of that Israeli strike. The strike actually happened. They did actually bomb a major prison complex in Tehran. The video that was posted by the foreign minister was AI. The vast majority of news organizations around the world actually published and recirculated that video. It wasn't real. So I think when it comes to the question of fact-checking with LLMs, I use LLMs like ChatGPT or Copilot or even Grok every day for my work. They help me do tasks that used to take several hours. Now with their help, I do them in 5 minutes. So they're amazing in so many aspects. But when it comes to fact-checking, because we now live in the age of populist anger, and trust in the authorities has been declining consistently for years now, people are now seeing these tools as something that they can trust. And they ask them questions about current affairs and breaking news. Like in the case of the war in Gaza, every day people are asking, for instance, on X, people are asking Grok, is this video of a strike in Gaza real? Is this video of hunger in Gaza real? And in many cases, the answers that they're getting are completely false. Like just last month, we had this picture that went really viral of a young girl in a community kitchen in Gaza that looked really pale and sort of very thin. And that picture was published by several major outlets. And people asked Grok, is this picture real? And Grok told them, no, this picture is from 2014, and it's a Yazidi girl that was captured by ISIS. The picture was actually taken in Gaza a couple of days before people asked that question of Grok, and we actually found it was captured by an AP photographer. But a lot of people were convinced. And to this day, when we actually said, no, the AP photographer actually said, I took this picture, I know this girl, and this is where I took it. There's a community kitchen in Gaza. I took it. People were like, no. Grok said it's from 2014. So we're actually entering, in one way, this is an amazing technology that is going to change our lives, but at the same time, it is probably going to make it even more difficult for all of us to find out what is true and what is not, and I worry about that. And also, another aspect of it that I worry about that I'm seeing more and more now is, as you said, when it becomes so hard to find out what's actually real and what's not, there are going to be videos and pictures and events that are real and are actually very important to cover, but will be dismissed as AI. And we've already had several examples of that in Gaza, in Ukraine, and I also do worry about that. So we're actually entering both a very exciting, but also at the same time genuinely frightening world.
What's something that scares me beyond the question of artificial intelligence is we're now in a world about belief and perception. And regardless of whatever we do, even if we show the truth point by point, we show that this is not true, this was done by artificial intelligence, we show that the voices were imitated, that these videos are fake, that we show that this fake is not real. A lot of times people don't believe us. Haters are going to hate, as they say. And it's become extremely difficult to fight against this. And typically in Africa as well, the AFP, for example, typically we're not even a public media agency. People think we're a public media agency, but systematically they think we're just sticking up for France. Some people are already convinced of that. And even when we show them the facts that show that that's not true, unfortunately, that doesn't help much. I'm sorry, it's kind of a pessimistic message, and I don't have a solution to give you right now, but I think it's something we definitely have to take into account. So we have to just have people to use their own intelligence, but actually that doesn't work.
One final point on the AI. Well, two actually. First, in Gaza, for example, what we saw how the AI was used at the beginning, which brings me to Shayan's last point about not believing things that are real. At the very beginning, the AI images that circulated were blatantly false, were extremely fake, and it was easy to see that they were fake. A Palestinian man with 4 arms holding 5 kids, all balanced together while cycling and I don't know what. They were done on purpose to say, look, this is AI, this is false, and to educate people to believe that everything else was going to be AI. And now we're at the point where, for a long time, AI only worked in conflicts like Iran-Israel or India-Pakistan, where we don't have that flood of information. In Gaza, we have real images. So the AI, the well-done AI wasn't gonna work that much because we have so many different images. In Ukraine, it's the same. Ukraine is the conflict that generated the largest, like more actually terabytes of videos than any other conflict before in the world. But now we're at the point where we are so confused, and so AI is effective not only in conflicts where we don't have images, and so AI can imagine that thing, but also where we actually know what's happening, and we don't know what to believe anymore, and fact checkers and journalists are overwhelmed, and they cannot be on top of everything, and audiences don't know what to believe anymore, and we dismiss things. And we're gonna miss a lot of the things that happen. People believe all sort of stuff, so.
Merci beaucoup. On va...
Thank you. We're going to move over to our question session now, because we can see that there's been a lot of, particularly this group has asked a lot of questions, and there's one I think is very interesting that talks about the moral force in the battlefield. We don't have any soldiers here or military staff here. We could talk about the military academy, the other discussion we had about that. But there was another question I saw earlier which disappeared, but it's something I would like to ask the entire panel. What are the vulnerabilities? What are the biggest vulnerabilities in this world of disinformation? Kind of goes back to the question about disinformation. Isn't it a war tactic that increases every day? So if you want to answer each one, what are the main vulnerabilities we're faced with right now? There's a lot of questions we'd like to answer, but I don't think we'll have time, unfortunately. The vulnerability, obviously, it's what the Make America Great community, I think, would cause the emotional impact of their images. So that's a risk. We could say we're maybe more rational than those people, but of course we are not. So vulnerability, I think, is that. It's just emotional vulnerability. But the good news is that we have examples, in particular in Europe, of countries who have invested in education on this subject. I can think of the Scandinavian countries, for example, where studies have been done, which are actually quite impressive, where we show that if we show little 6-year-old children, for example, in Sweden or in Finland, we show them certain types of image, they are capable of identifying that they were done with AI. But also, what we teach them is that they should take a step back and see how that affects their emotions. A given type of image will affect different types of emotions, and that makes them more resilient. And also some, they might just identify, it's different from people might just identify certain things as propaganda without even looking at it, which is important as well. And in the study I talked about, they showed this also to teenagers, 16-year-old teenagers in America, and they were unable to identify it as artificial intelligence. So the good news is it's something we can work on. There's an educational element that we need to work on, and I think we're aware of that in France. I think it's something we know here in France. It goes across government. It'll be with our education system. It'll be with different organizations that we have that work in this area as well.
in my view, that the biggest vulnerability that we have, and this relates to all of us, is confirmation bias, personal biases. And in my opinion, from what I see every day, it actually is the main driver of mis and disinformation on the internet. And it's because like, confirmation bias is not a new thing. It's existed for centuries. It's kind of natural to us as human beings, and tons of literature has been written about it. But social media in particular has made it much, much worse, because we are now, as we consume more of our information and news on the internet and on social media, we do not see opposing views. We sort of like this party, and we start liking and reading and sharing content from this party, and for the rest of our time on whatever social media platform we're on, we're going to see the same content that we agree with, not content that we kind of challenges our views and our opinions. So confirmation bias and sort of uber partisanship and personal bias that is being encouraged by social media algorithms, I think, is the biggest risk that we're facing, and it's getting worse.
Ça marche? Oui.
I think there are two main vulnerabilities. I think one is important, is about the vernacular that they use on these sites, especially in Africa, in these rural populations who use social networks, and they share a lot of this contents in languages that are never, there's no fact checking is done, so we aren't even aware of this. It goes under the radar, you might say. It's not the things that are seen by like the major news outlets or by government agencies. Another thing that's a big problem. Another thing is the fact that the platforms don't take responsibility for what they're publishing more and more. We have partnerships with Facebook, with Google, with TikTok, etc. But right now we don't have, and it's even worse in America as well, because contracts were terminated with the fact-checking networks, for example. We would expect that these trends would continue, though, in Europe to do more fact-checking. But it's a real problem. Everything we see with all the sponsoring that goes on the social networks, they make a lot of money off the sponsors. And it's a way that they can actually hide money and find who is responsible. Who is going to check if it's true so they can publish warnings, but who's responsible for doing that?
I'll add one other thing that maybe is less evident usually when we think about it, and is infrastructure, our technology and digital infrastructure. The infrastructure that collects data, shares data, and analyzes data is the same one. And it goes from what you're using to write on social media, or what you actually watch and share, what you pay attention to. It collects data on that. It's the same infrastructure that is used for collection of humanitarian access data, for example, to get people's fingerprints and bio informations to distribute aid. And it's the same information. It's the same infrastructure that is actually powering the nation, but not that nation. It's actually quite old already, a decade old. Artificial intelligence warfare machine. And so we have a problem of data collection infrastructure, and that is a major vulnerability that usually is not in front of our eyes. A lot of the times when we interact with disinformation and misinformation, we also generate new data that can be weaponized and used against us in different ways.
Merci beaucoup. Il nous reste le temps.
Thank you. I have time for just maybe one more question. I know there's a lot. There's one that talked about Telegram. So another difficult topic. I wanted to ask you if Telegram is the network which has the most disinformation. Telegram is used a great deal in Ukraine, we know. I'd like to ask that question. Who would like to volunteer to answer the question? The first thing I'd like to say is that it's true that Telegram is one of the first networks used for disinformation. And we have different tools we use to analyze the information battlefield. These tools, what they help to do is to respond quicker when we analyze these, this misinformation. When we are able to see these narratives, we need to get them as quickly as possible. Sometimes they're in closed groups where they're kind of tested out before they appear on networks.
I would say it's worse. I mean, have you seen Facebook or TikTok or Instagram? I mean, all of them are pretty bad when it comes to this particular issue. I wouldn't say it's any particularly worse. What is interesting about Telegram is because it has, first of all, Telegram is not a fringe, it's massive. Like globally, it has something like nearly almost 1 billion users. So the vast majority of people who use Telegram are just normal people who use it for, particularly in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East, it's actually the #1 platform for people to message each other, like WhatsApp. But a lot of people, particularly in the West and also in other parts of the world, who want to engage in dodgy stuff, sort of in some cases illegal, in some cases extreme political movements, actually get on Telegram because it has very lax moderation, more lax than, say, Facebook or X or Instagram or Snapchat or the rest of these major platforms. So in that sense, for the type of work that I do, Telegram is probably the most important platform. We have to check it every day because there are people of interest on that platform, particularly people who get kicked off Facebook or X or YouTube. They often find refuge on Telegram. You will definitely find them on Telegram. But also, there's a lot of sort of under the surface illegal operations that happen on Telegram, which in many cases are difficult to trace and find. But at the same time, I say, if you're interested in this type of investigative journalism, you definitely need to be on Telegram and familiarize yourself with Telegram.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I think we're all done. I'm sure all of you would have agreed we could have stayed much longer. I'm sorry some of you didn't get your questions answered. But it'll be a great reason for you to come back to continue these discussions with us, which were very interesting and very important. I was just about to ask you for a round of applause, but I see you understood on your own.